what is constructive development and how does it help us understand how adults grow?
Yeah, yes. So I'll try to make this easy and digestible. I'm sure we'll get into it further, but constructive development theory, otherwise known as CDT, is really a theory of how adult psychology evolves throughout our lives. And so prior to CDT and all of the research that was done on can adults continue to develop essentially was the initial question, or like are we kind of stuck like once the prefrontal cortex is formed, like are we just done, or is there more to be had? CDT says there is more development and evolution that adults can experience over time, and how CDT defines it is through this lens of what's called meaning making. And so it really shows us how through lived experience, adults can change what meaning they're making about the world and about themselves in the world. And it's a framework to see where you might be on, they almost have this hierarchical path that distinguishes different stages of development through adulthood.
There's these 5 different stages, and the third stage is called the socialized mind, or level 3, depending on who's writing about it. And then the fourth is maybe a phrase that people have heard more often is the idea of being self-authored. So
Mm-hmm.
kind of dive a little bit deeper into those two and how they interact and what's the difference between them, and then kind of introduce the idea of inside out versus outside in.
Yeah, yeah. So to your point, so stage three is the socialized mind, and that's where most of us spend, the majority of our adulthoods. And what it means is that we're creating meaning based on the social group that we're a part of. So, for example, if you are an Episcopalian, like random example, that's a
Yeah.
religion if people aren't familiar with it, you would create your identity based on that association with a social group, a set of norms, a set of behaviors and values. And so you're understanding yourself through that social group. The self-authored stage, which is stage 4, is where you kind of intuitively, based on the name, you're creating meaning about yourself in the world more from your own internal kind of locus of control. You're taking information in, and then you're deciding on your own what meaning that has for you, rather than kind of eliminating that step of reflection and just
Mm-hmm.
accepting it as if they believe that, then I believe that. There's that kind of pause
Yeah.
of what do I think about this? And then you can go back into the world, taking from it what you find to be true, and then leaving things that, for whatever reason, through your lived experience, you don't resonate with.
For people that aren't familiar with the theory, you might have heard of the idea of like a midlife transition, or maybe in a movie, like a midlife crisis. So the transition from 3 to 4 tends to sort of encapsulate that. So how would you connect that maybe more colloquial idea to the transition?
When people start to realize that they don't have to take on all the beliefs of the groups that they've affiliated themselves with, it can lead to somewhat of an unraveling. And it can put you into what people describe as this existential crisis, where it's like, is anything true? Like, I think it can really, you know, challenge you and challenge the foundation that you've been standing on, because we operate in the world through making meaning. Like, I go
Yeah.
into a coffee shop and I see a barista smile at me and I say, okay, this is a friendly person, like there's all these conclusions that we're coming to about the world that we're in. But if you have a challenging experience to that of like, oh, they smiled at me, do they want something from me? Like there's so
Mm-hmm.
many different ways to interpret what's happening to you every single day,
Mm-hmm.
that it can, yeah, to the midlife crisis, if you've oriented yourself to the world through these assumptions from your social groups, like that's a pretty easy, stress-free way to be, to a degree. And then when you get
Yeah.
into the self-authored space, it's like, oh, I need to be more thoughtful. I need to be with myself. And it can be challenging to
Yeah.
take the time and energy that's actually required to reflect and ask
Mm-hmm.
yourself, what am I feeling? What do I think? It's not something we're necessarily taught. So it's actually a new skill set. And it can lead to kind of that moment of what is what is
Yeah. Yeah.
true. And that can
Yeah.
be pretty destabilizing until you get back to some solid footing and a connection to yourself, I would argue, is what gives you that.